There is a number floating around the auto industry right now that sounds like a typo. 1,093 kilowatts. That is the charging power of a battery that is sitting inside a production car in China today. Not a concept car, not a lab experiment. A car you can walk into a showroom and buy. And here is what makes engineers lose sleep over it. For as long as electric cars have existed, there has been one rule nobody could break. Battery scientists even gave it a name, the impossible triangle. The rule said you could have fast charging, long lifespan, or total safety. Pick two. You could never have all three. Every battery ever made has obeyed this rule, until now. A company called Geely says it has shattered the triangle completely, using the most ordinary battery chemistry on the planet. And if their numbers are real, the balance of power in the electric car world just shifted overnight. If you're finding this useful, a quick like genuinely helps more than you think, and subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into how they actually did it. The dual-sided cooling, the chemistry that survives a rifle bullet, and the million-kilometer lifespan. And stick around, because at the end we'll settle the only question that matters. Has Geely actually dethroned the legendary BYD Blade Battery? Before we can appreciate what Geely pulled off, you need to understand the wall the entire industry kept crashing into. Picture everything you'd ever want from the battery in your next car. You want it to charge so quickly that stopping for power feels no different than stopping for fuel. You want it to keep performing year after year without fading. And you want absolute certainty that it will never catch fire, no matter what happens to the car. 3 wishes. Sounds reasonable, right? Yet for decades, the entire battery industry operated under a brutal assumption. You could only ever cash in 2 of them. The third was always the sacrifice. Engineers treated this like gravity, not a challenge to overcome, but a law to design around. Here's why the trade-off exists. Slamming electricity into a battery at high speed creates heat, lots of it. And heat slowly cooks the fragile chemistry inside the cells, so a battery tuned for blazing fast charging quietly ages itself with every single session. It feels amazing in year 1. By year 3, it's a shadow of what it was. Now go the other direction. If you want a battery that lives forever, you must treat it gently, slow, careful charging, low temperatures, no stress. Sure, it might outlive the car itself, but you'll spend half your life waiting at charging stations. And safety. The traditional way to make a battery safer was to armor it. Thicker separators, heavier casings, more protective material packed between cells. All that armor adds weight and eats up space that could have stored energy. Safer, yes, but heavier and less capable. Push any corner of the triangle, and the other 2 collapse inward. Speed murders lifespan. Lifespan demands slowness. Safety demands weight. Every engineer on Earth accepted this as the cost of doing business, which is exactly why Geely's announcement landed like a thunderclap. And here's the part that really matters. They didn't cheat by switching to some exotic, eye-wateringly expensive chemistry. They used LFP, lithium iron phosphate, the same humble, dependable chemistry that already powers millions of ordinary EVs. LFP has always been the safe, durable workhorse. What it has never been is fast. Geely's battery, called the Golden Brick, is already installed in the Lynk & Co. 10, a car rolling off production lines in China as we speak. There's also crucial context here. China's government recently rewrote its battery safety rulebook, and the new standard, GB 38031-2025, effective July 2026, is the toughest on the planet. The old rule was basically a fire alarm. If the battery began to overheat, the car had to warn you 5 minutes before flames appeared, so you could escape. The car would burn, but you'd live. The new standard is radically different. It demands 0 flames and 0 explosion for at least 2 full hours after thermal runaway begins. The philosophy flipped completely. Don't warn people about the fire, make the fire impossible. Geely didn't wait for the deadline. They certified their entire battery lineup by May 2025, months before they had to. And into this new era of extreme regulation, they launched the golden brick, claiming all three corners of the triangle at once. Let's start with the corner everyone's talking about: speed. That headline figure, 1,093 kilowatts, was measured in official testing. But to grasp how absurd it is, you need to understand something called the C rate. Think of C rate as charging speed measured against the battery's own size. A 1C battery takes a full hour to charge from empty. A 2C battery does it in half an hour. Geely's golden brick charges at 12C. In plain language, a full battery in roughly 5 minutes. For LFP chemistry, that number was considered fantasy not long ago. People would have openly laughed at it. But here's what's even more impressive than the speed itself. It's what didn't happen during that charge. Physics is merciless here. The relationship between electric current and heat isn't linear, it's exponential. Double the current and you don't get double the heat, you get 4 times the heat. It's why a household wire stays cool under a small load, but can melt under a big one. This exponential heat curve is the reason ultra-fast charging has always been a dead end. And there's a second brutal rule. For every 10 degrees a battery runs above its ideal temperature, its degradation rate doubles. A little extra heat isn't a minor inconvenience. It's the battery aging in fast forward. China's new law caps LFP charging temperature at 65 degrees. During the 1093 kilowatt test, the golden brick held at 64, 1 single degree of headroom, while swallowing more than a megawatt of power. That is a thermal management masterclass, and it came from 3 defenses stacked on top of each other. Defense 1. Hardware. Nearly every EV on the road cools its battery cells from one side only, a cold plate pressed against the top or bottom. Geely wrapped liquid cooling around both faces of every cell. That doubles the contact area and halves the distance heat must travel to escape. Cooling efficiency jumped 35%. Imagine trying to cool a hot pan by resting one side of it on ice, versus dunking the whole thing in ice water. That's the difference. Defense 2. Intelligence. Sensors woven through the pack check every individual cell dozens of times per second. But they're not just reading temperatures, they're predicting them. The system calculates where heat is about to spike and redirects cooling there before the spike happens. And each cell is wrapped in an aerospace-grade insulating shield, so even if one cell runs hot, its neighbors never feel it. Defense 3. Prevention. Rather than only removing heat after it appears, Geely reshaped the cell's internal architecture, using a principle known as Bernardi's energy balance, so less heat is created in the first place. They restructured how electricity flows inside the cell to cut resistance and polarization at the source. They're not extinguishing the fire, they're removing the fuel. All of this rides on a 900-volt electrical architecture. Most older EVs run on 400 volts. Higher voltage is like moving water through a wider channel. The same volume flows with less pressure, and less pressure means less heat. It's how Geely moves megawatt-level power without cooking the wiring. So what does this mean on an actual road? The Lynk & Co. 10 charges from 10 to 70% in 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Reach 97% in under 9 minutes. That's roughly 2 kilometers of range recovered for every second plugged in. You could add a full day's driving before your coffee order is ready. But speed means nothing if it destroys the battery, which raises the obvious question: what happens to this thing after years of brutal 12C charging? Geely's answer: 4,500 full charge cycles. One cycle means a complete charge and a complete discharge. Now do the math with me. Say a typical driver gets around 220 kilometers of real-world range per cycle. Multiply 4,500 by 220 and you land at 990,000 kilometers. Geely rounds it to a clean 1 million. Let that sink in. Most people replace their car before 200,000 kilometers. At 1 million, the battery isn't the thing that wears out, everything around it is. The seats, the suspension, the body panels will give up long before the cells do. So how do you keep a battery alive while hammering it with over a megawatt? Because ultra-fast charging doesn't just heat a battery, it physically wounds it. Geely fights back with two mechanisms. The first deals with swelling. When electricity floods into a cell, the materials inside physically expand, like a dry sponge dropped in water. Do that violently enough, thousands of times, and microscopic fractures appear. Once they do, capacity starts dying. Geely's response is three technologies working as one. A self-healing SEI film that seals micro-cracks the moment they form. The battery literally repairs its own wounds. A gel buffer layer that gives the internal materials room to breathe, flexing and shifting so mechanical stress never concentrates anywhere. And specially engineered binders, essentially flexible glue that hold everything together through endless cycles of expansion and contraction. The battery can swell and shrink 4,500 times without permanent damage. The second mechanism has a name that sounds like science fiction. S+ active coating. Think of it as sunscreen for electrodes. The electrodes inside a cell are delicate, and the chemical violence of 12C charging gradually erodes them. The S+ coating is a protective skin applied directly onto the electrode surface, absorbing that chemical stress before it can do harm, the same way sunscreen takes the hit so your skin doesn't. Together, these systems let the golden brick survive the most abusive charging routine imaginable and emerge with its health intact. Imagine a pair of running shoes you could wear for a marathon every day for a decade without the soles thinning. That's the claim. 2 corners down. Now the third, and the one that decides whether people actually trust this technology. Safety. Geely's safety philosophy goes far beyond passing regulatory checklists. Since 2024, they've run 48 separate test programs, over 48,000 hours of testing, and deliberately destroyed nearly 70,000 battery samples in the process. Here's the detail that tells you everything. 23 of their test protocols are harsher than China's already brutal new standard requires, and 12 of them are tests Geely invented themselves. Nobody asked for these. They created them because they wanted to discover every conceivable failure mode in a lab, so it could never happen to a family on a highway. There's a principle behind this obsession called Heinrich's Law. It comes from decades of studying workplace accidents, and it found a chilling pattern. Behind every one catastrophe sit roughly 29 smaller incidents and 300 near misses. The lesson is simple and powerful. Hunt down the 300 near misses, and the catastrophe can never occur. Geely applies this thinking to batteries. They would rather annihilate tens of thousands of cells in testing than have a single one fail in a customer's driveway. And some of these tests sound less like engineering and more like stunts. The crush test. They drive a 36-ton tank over a fully assembled battery pack. That's 1.8 times the force the national standard demands. Any ordinary pack would crumple. The golden brick holds its structure. The bullet test. They fire a 5.56mm round, the same caliber used in military rifles, straight through a fully charged cell. The projectile is moving at 920 meters per second. It punches clean through the battery. And the cell? Voltage stays above 3.2 volts. No fire. The battery takes a bullet and keeps working. Then the needle test. Arguably the most savage of all. 5mm steel needles driven into a fully charged cell from multiple angles simultaneously, creating the worst internal short-circuit engineers can devise. Then they watch it for a full hour. No smoke, no flame, no explosion. It just sits there, stable, as if nothing happened. And here's something almost no company does. Geely helped write the new underbody impact test that became part of China's national standard, then made 12 of its battery floor safety patents available to the entire industry, including its direct competitors. They decided raising the safety floor for everyone mattered more than guarding secrets. Remember the new law demanding 0 flames for 2 hours after thermal runaway. The golden brick is designed so that even if one cell has a thermal event, the energy stays locked inside that single cell. The aerospace barriers and gel layers contain it completely. Neighboring cells don't even register that anything happened. The fire can't spread because the fire never starts. That's the third corner. Speed, lifespan, safety, all three, simultaneously, in one ordinary LFP battery, which brings us to the heavyweight fight. Has Geely actually beaten the BYD Blade Battery? The honest answer is more interesting than yes or no. Start with infrastructure, because that's where the gap is widest. The best battery on Earth is useless if no charger can feed it. BYD has spent years building its own flash charging network, and it's already live. They're even deploying massive 1.5 megawatt chargers across Europe. BYD owns the entire chain: the car, the battery, the charger, the station. When a BYD driver plugs in, everything works because one company built the whole ecosystem. Geely's megawatt charging, by contrast, depends on a partner, AN Energy, which is still in early pilot stages, with stations in only a handful of cities like Hangzhou, Beijing, and Shenzhen. Nationwide coverage doesn't exist yet. To compensate, Geely struck a deal giving its drivers access to NIO's extensive charging network. Clever move. But borrowing someone's network isn't the same as owning one. Now the raw numbers. BYD's system peaks at 1,500 kilowatts, higher than Geely's 1,093. If this were purely a spec sheet contest, BYD wins. But drivers don't live on spec sheets. What matters on a real highway is how fast you go from low battery to enough range to keep moving. And on that practical measure, Geely pulls ahead. Its 10 to 70 and 10 to 97 times beat what BYD's battery achieves. Geely gets you rolling sooner, despite the lower peak. So did Geely beat BYD? In pure cell-level innovation, breaking the impossible triangle with ordinary chemistry, Geely has done something the whole industry said couldn't be done. That's a genuine breakthrough. But BYD remains the undisputed king of mass production and charging infrastructure. The finest battery in the world means little if you can't plug it in on a road trip. And BYD's mature, fast-growing network delivers that peace of mind every single day. And that leaves one fascinating question hanging over the entire industry. If plain LFP chemistry can already deliver this level of speed, lifespan, and safety, why is the world still pouring billions into solid-state battery research? Solid-state's original promise was to solve all three problems at once. Geely may have just done it with chemistry that's been around for years. Maybe some of those billions would be better spent building chargers the way BYD does. Either way, the impossible triangle doesn't look so impossible anymore. And the Geely-BYD rivalry is just getting started, which is fantastic news for anyone who will ever drive an electric car. If this deep dive opened your eyes, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Breaking down complex tech like this takes serious effort, and your support keeps it coming. And one final question for you. If you were buying an EV tomorrow, would you pick Geely's blistering charging speed, or BYD's massive, proven charging network? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.